All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are objectively unpacking an hour-long, highly charged political monologue from Sam Bamford's platform Two Worlds Collide. Now, whether you tune into his stuff every week or you're literally hearing his name for the very first time today, this broadcast is an absolutely fascinating case study. It really shows us exactly how alternative media is reshaping political communication from the ground up. We're going to break down how he constructs his arguments and, maybe more importantly, how he rallies his audience.
So to really understand where he's coming from, you have to hear his central thesis. He says, "I'm getting completely sick of being governed by losers and morons." Honestly, that quote hits the nail on the head when it comes to Bamford's tone. Throughout the whole broadcast, he projects this incredibly aggressive, uncompromising grievance against the established political class. He's clearly not interested in polite, formal debate. His style is raw, it's direct, and it heavily relies on channeling the visceral frustrations of his listeners.
To make sense of this massive, unedited broadcast, we've taken his sprawling arguments and organized them into 5 key pillars: the media strategy, the unserious political class, culture wars in history, fractures on the right, and finally, the audience ultimatum. Kicking things off with Section 1, the media strategy, and his goal of replacing the mainstream.
Bamford is actually really open about his ultimate ambition here. He built this massive following, literally hundreds of thousands of followers using those punchy 3-minute social media reels. But now, he's actively migrating that entire audience over to these 1-hour, completely unedited YouTube monologues. He openly admits he makes mistakes, like he'll mix up acronyms or struggle to find the right word, but he actually frames that lack of polish as authenticity. His stated goal is to train his audience to watch him for an hour instead of the nightly news. He's literally attempting to replace mainstream media entirely.
Moving right along to Section 2, the unserious political class, or as we can call it, TikToks versus reality.
Once he sets the stage, he just launches into his core critique of the government. And he doesn't really view them as a leadership body, he views them as a disconnected circus. He illustrates this brilliantly through a really harsh visual contrast. On one hand, Bamford highlights the grim reality for everyday Australians by reading audience emails. He explicitly mentions a father who is forced to move his 8-year-old son out of an apartment and into a caravan just because rents are soaring so high. Then, he violently contrasts that hardship with politicians, specifically calling out a 21-year-old senator named Walker and veteran politician Bob Catter, who are inside Parliament House filming TikTok dances. Bamford uses this juxtaposition to argue that the political elite are essentially mocking the public. He literally likens them to the out-of-touch rulers in the Hunger Games. He then extends this whole theme of unseriousness to bureaucratic absurdity. So the key anecdote here, which was originally brought up by politician Jess Collins, but Bamford aggressively amplifies it, is about a light bulb on a military base. If it goes out, a highly trained combat engineer cannot just change it. No way. Step 1, they have to log a job on a bureaucratic app called Service Connect. Step 2, wait for processing. Step 3, a civilian contractor is eventually driven onto the base. And Step 4, defenses build thousands of dollars just for the call-out. Bamford points out the extreme irony here. We trust these combat engineers to dig up deadly IEDs in Afghanistan, but government red tape absolutely forbids them from changing a base light bulb.
Which brings us to Section 3, culture wars in history, focusing on his Labour Party grievances. If you trace his argument, Bamford jumps across decades to legitimize his grievances. It's like a giant puzzle for him. He jumps from historical declarations of war in 1939 right into controversial legislative changes in 2012 and then connects them all the way to the election of the Albanese government in 2022. He uses this chronological map to argue that bad decisions from the past are directly causing the cultural fractures we're dealing with today. Let's unpack exactly what those grievances are. Bamford goes on a fiery attack against former Prime Minister Julia Gillard. He claims her 2012 Sex Discrimination Act changes acted as a, quote, Trojan horse by prioritizing gender identity over biological sex, and he links her past policies directly to modern controversies like the Giggle versus Tickle court case. But he doesn't stop at social issues, right? He targets her corporate involvement today, pointing to her role at HMC Capital. He alleges hypocrisy in the green energy sector, specifically highlighting a $50 million profit flip on projects subsidized under Minister Chris Bowen. He's really trying to paint a picture of systemic, cross-sector corruption. Then, he pivots sharply into a defense of history. Bamford expresses this intense, visceral outrage over a recent comment where Defense Industry Minister Pat Conroy allegedly labeled former Prime Minister Robert Menzies a Nazi appeaser.
Bamford vehemently defends Menzies here. He forcefully reminds his audience that Menzies actually declared war on Nazi Germany in 1939 and deployed hundreds of thousands of Australian troops to go fight. So for Bamford, Conroy's comment isn't just bad history. It's a deliberate insult to the legacy of the Australian military and a really cheap tactic to smear conservative figures as fascists.
All right, Section 4, Fractures on the Right. This is where it gets into Hastie versus One Nation.
What's totally fascinating here is that Bamford doesn't just attack the left. He turns his rhetorical fire inward, exposing these really deep, bitter divisions on his own side of politics. Mapping out his view of the landscape is super revealing. On his side, his stated allies include the populist One Nation Party, controversial veteran Ben Roberts-Smith, and everyday working-class Australians. But his targets? They include Liberal MP Andrew Hastie, the ABC, moderates, and the broader political establishment. Bamford is drawing a very hard line in the sand, officially separating the populist right from the moderate right.
His absolute sharpest critique inside the party is aimed right at Liberal MP Andrew Hastie. Bamford accuses Hastie of breaking a sacred veteran code by testifying against Ben Roberts-Smith. And get this, he's absolutely disgusted that Hastie attended a mid-season winter ball in a $2,000 tuxedo, happily taking photos with the ABC, an organisation Bamford claims hates veterans. He argues Hastie is just playing a role, desperately seeking approval from the Prime Minister and moderates just to climb the Liberal Party ladder. Bamford is so furious about this, he openly threatens to help Ben Roberts-Smith campaign for One Nation just to destroy Hastie's career in the seat of Canning.
Finally, we hit Section 5, the Audience Ultimatum. And honestly, this one is pretty wild. No 5XL shirts.
This is where Bamford shifts gears completely. He addresses his listeners directly with this incredibly harsh, unconventional sign-off. He says, "If you want a 5XL t-shirt, it ain't coming. Lose some weight." He is completely rejecting audience requests to manufacture 5XL merchandise for his show. Instead of just catering to consumer demand like a normal platform, he issues a blunt, uncompromising lifestyle ultimatum directly to his own supporters. It's such a fascinating look at how alternative media figures cultivate this hyper-masculine, tough-love relationship with their base.
And he literally gives them strict marching orders. Here are his specific demands. You have to wake up an hour earlier, commit to a 45-minute daily walk or bike ride, stick to a rigid diet of red meat, chicken, broccoli, and brown rice, and completely cut out soda, sugar, and even your Netflix subscriptions. But here's the hook. He offers an incentive. He promises to provide completely free merchandise to any listener who can actually provide statistics proving they've dropped down to a 4XL or lower. So it really goes way beyond politics. He is attempting to fundamentally mold his followers' everyday lifestyle.
So all of this brings us to a massive question we have to ask ourselves. How do these completely uncompromising, highly polarizing monologues reshape what modern voters expect from their leaders? Bamford's broadcast is raw, it's deeply aggressive, and it fundamentally rejects all the polished, focus group norms of traditional politics. Whether you completely agree with his stances or you're totally opposed to them, the influence of this unedited, grievance-driven, long-form alternative media is undeniably growing. It really forces us to ask, is this the new frontier of political persuasion? And how in the world will traditional institutions ever compete with it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.